What's going on, guys? Episode number 52 of the Daru Strong Podcast. I'm your host, Phil Daru. We are back in the lab, or the office, as you would say. Pretty soon we'll be having our own podcast booth, so stay tuned for that. We're definitely going to revamp the entire podcast booth. But before we did that, we're going to go ahead and talk about who we had on the podcast today. I had the opportunity to bring in my guy, Tony Ricci. Now, if you guys have been following me, maybe saw the Fight Strength podcast I did a while back, he's been a recent guest on all of my podcast channels, and also one of my mentors, one of the guys that I would say that truly brings a large amount of light to the fight sports world. When you're talking about getting a fighter ready and prepared, the guy has skin in the game, but again, very highly accomplished from an academic standpoint. You're talking about 5 degrees. He has PhDs and master's degrees and everything else that I can remember. Also was a judo athlete, wrestler, bodybuilder. You can see from his ears, he has some skin in the game. There's a lot of cauliflower going on. So we talk a lot about fight sports. We talk a lot about nutrition. We talk a lot about weight cutting. We also talk about the psychology of the athlete, especially for a fighter getting ready for a fight. So don't miss that. But before we do that, I have to shout out the sponsors, Athletic CBD. Go check them out now. Again, if you have some bumps, bruises, any soreness there, CBD, you can check them out, athleticcbd.com. Use my discount code DARU at your checkout. You'll get a discount there. Also, if you're looking to rock some of the shoes that you've seen me in my YouTube videos or on my Instagram, it is Vivo Barefoot. So go to vivobarefoot.com. Check out what they have there. Again, it's stylish, but also very functional. That's the main thing, right? You're going to use it for training. You can also use it for walking around the town. Again, I think that for what it is, again, you're going to have style there, but also it's going to help you with your overall functionality, your gait pattern, strengthening up your feet. And again, like I said, it's something that I use and all my coaches here at the Daru Strong Performance Gym do use, along with my athletes. So Athletic CBD, vivobarefoot.com. Go to vivobarefoot.com. You can use Daru Strong at your checkout. You get 10% off. And for Athletic CBD, you just use Daru and you'll get a % off on that too as well. Now, let's get on to the podcast.
Welcome to the Daru Strong Podcast. Daru Strong Podcast.
Let's go. Mind over matter. Put your mind somewhere else and keep going. That little voice in your head is trying to stop you from getting to where you want to be. Be successful and keep moving forward.
With your host and world-renowned strength and conditioning coach, Phil Daru.
So one thing I'm very excited about is I'll be moving and relocating to Florida to take a job at the Department of Neuroscience and Psychology at Nova Southeastern. But, for those who don't know me, my name's Tony Ricci. I'm a good friend of Phil's and had the fortune of working together with him. And we met about, 3 years ago, I think, correct?
About 3.5.
Yeah, 3.5 years, did a couple of podcasts, and really enjoyed, coming together with you because of your love of fight performance and advancing it. But as a whole, my background is just a guy who we lost, I guess, about almost 2 weeks ago, one of my heroes, Marvelous Marvin Hagler. And when I was a little boy, what got me into fight sports, it was so cool because you had Marvelous Marvin fighting Sugar, right? My dad was a huge boxing fan, came over from Italy, and Duran, great days. So that made me a fight sport fan. On top of the great thing, when I was a kid, the Olympics were largely combat sports. Not what you see today, right? The primary sports, and that's okay, these sports are great, but the primary sports on prime time were wrestling, weightlifting, boxing, okay, throw in some swimming and gymnastics. So I grew up watching United States box Cuba and Russia and in wrestling. So I was a fight fan my whole life, did karate, various types of judo.
What kind of karate did you do?
So it was called American Combat.
Okay.
Yeah, it was pretty much, for its time, it was actually pretty good.
Yeah.
I
remember, I don't know if I told you I did Kempo when I was
the Kempo's a great style,
like 8 years old,
Yeah, that style was pretty much if you can hit somebody with a book and it works, hit them with a book.
Exactly,
And that was in the 80s, so it was a little bit ahead of its time. Yeah. But then I always been around it. I really didn't do much sports in school because we grew up, my family were from Italy, and they're commercial fishermen, so I had to work on the weekends. I had to work almost every day after school too, so it was a family business. So it took me out of that, but I did everything on my own. And then went to school for my whole life, you know, just love academia. And I have
Still to this day.
yeah, I have 5 degrees, you know.
5 degrees. He didn't stutter when he said that.
No, it's no, yeah.
You're all cleaning out your ears. That's 5 degrees and at the highest level.
It's no big deal. It's just something I like, Phil. I like. I hire school, I guess, if you will, as a personal trainer. So you know, hey, let me teach me something. But anyway, so that's where I am, and I've been on the Longo Weidman team for a very long time. I've had the fortune of working with those guys. And Matt Serra and Ray, and they're great people, man. You know, you've met them, and you know them. So anybody in that camp and that team, I've worked with in fight sports, and a lot of boxing too. So I've been very lucky and blessed. Just a lucky guy who gets to be around things he loves, you know. Yeah,
for sure. So what are you doing as of right now? I know you've been working with Ray for a long time, and if you guys don't know. Tony's Instagram, is it
Fight Shape, yeah, just / Ricci, R-I-C-C, my last name.
With Tony, like, when I first met him, I remember watching him on Instagram and seeing some of the movements were very specified, like, but they made sense. There wasn't anything that was unnatural. There wasn't anything that was going to deteriorate the biomechanics of the sport. Right. It was very thought out, and I liked it. I reached out, I think, believing it was for the Fight Strength podcast.
It was, yes, you were doing it at the time.
Guys, I haven't checked that one out. Go to my old podcast, Fight Strength Podcast. This guy's been on there for a couple of times too. But so where did you get like the passion for like wanting to not just train but also help with the fighters and get them better?
I think as a fan first, Phil, as I stated, right, you love the sport. Yeah. And then as I went to school and I trained myself, I found, wow, this is incredibly complicated. Yeah. I fell in love with fight physiology, right? It's so different than our other sports. Yeah. American baseball, American football, the bioenergetics are not remotely related. Sure. You have a 3-second, 4-second energy bout and 40 seconds rest, right? And some sports too, you train the shot putter. So they're much more singular in their quality. And I'm not to say they shouldn't be in overall excellent condition, but the demands of the event themselves require a much easier, a less complex integration of biomotor qualities. Like if you look at MMA or boxing, it's really, in many ways you do one thing to help something and you're contradicting the other, right? Local muscle endurance may hurt the power. Training power may hurt a little bit on the cardio side, you know. So what I really took a passion into it because I was so fascinated by the physiology and how guys like us can maybe potentially augment that and then do that on top of 20 training sessions a week outside of what we're doing, right? So that's what made me really love it. And being around it, most of the kids and the guys, the girls that fight, the women that fight, just good people. And that's what keeps me around it.
For sure. There's a definite complexity to the sport of mixed martial arts, but in combat sports or fight sports in general, it's like, you know, you have to balance out all those different demands. Right. And then also balance out personality traits. you know, So like, and you're getting that's a whole thing, right? So we can do a whole another podcast on that.
Exactly.
But that's another reason why you're getting into more psychology, isn't that right?
Yeah, the mental performance. So I did complete my second doctorate, which is in performance psychology and cognitive performance. And it's just to really help athletes navigate through optimal ways to think through things if that's an issue, right? So sometimes anxiety is hyper-anxiety or people. So how does it help? You might get a guy in MMA who's giving away around every time because he's a slow starter, right? You might get the person that you train beautifully. And I think we've all been through this where we have a 10, 12-week camp by every measurable metric, by the skill coach's eyes. Everything has gone wonderful. And then a round into the fight, everything falls apart. Right, and that is and there's a recent situation where that did occur, and that is more due to the anxiety that may occur. And some athletes, the top athletes would tell you, why would you need a sports psychologist or a mental performance coach? And I get that, but the top athletes in the world still use them just to help train and optimize cognition and the way they think or the way they practice. And it really can come in helpful.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of my guys now understand the importance. We got a couple of UFC guys that use it, and then I have my Olympians, my judo Olympians, that are required to use that.
Right.
You know, and I feel like, and they've told me too that it's helped their game tremendously. You know, just from a psychological standpoint, 90% of it, you know, I'm throwing out percentages, but at the end of the day, it's like it's almost all mental once all the work has been put in and it's all done. So now when you go to step in to compete, you have to take those mental barriers and push them away. And also you're fighting against yourself in a sense.
No doubt.
You know, I remember walking in the cage and, you know, there's all these different feelings going on through your brain, and then you're staring across from a guy that wants to literally kill you. You know, and at the end of the day, you have to be confident enough in your approach. You have to be confident enough in your game plan and your training throughout the entire time. But there's still those negative things that come into your brain. And I think that, correct me if I'm wrong with this one, but I think for me at least, it was from practicing those particular movements and scenarios over and over and over again in camp allowed me to block out that negative feeling because I knew that I was ready and prepared for any situation.
Yes, you hit it. It's certainly a confidence in the preparation, and for you that translated. What is amazing, but you're absolutely right. We just call it readiness, if you will. And readiness and activation in sports psychology, that's one, or mental performance. And it is the rehearsal of the skill development, unequivocally, that breeds confidence. But occasionally, too, to your point, the built-in confidence that you built from the skill itself, sometimes the moment of the fight itself, right, has to be governed because it's very different. And some athletes do struggle with that side of it. You said it beautifully. I mean, once you get in there, it really is all mental because all the other faculties and that you've, you know, advanced, they're ready to go. You've done everything. So you really make the decision then and there as to what's going to happen, at least in your performance, right? Not so much in the outcome of the fight. But I've had a lot of guys, and I've had to say to them, you know, nobody can take you down without your permission. Nobody's gonna nobody's gonna hurt you in stand up without your permission because you are that competent. They're going against the best in the UFC in the gym, but when they get in the cage, the mind goes elsewhere. And it's not a condemnation. It's just a reason why we have mental performance. And we try to, what I would just say, I don't want to lag on too long, but you said it beautifully. You activate, you prepare. Well, we have to have a routine before they get in that cage that is completely known better than anything else you know. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And you do that every day, right? Under no pressure, and then whatever pressure you feel before fight time is mitigated to an extent.
Yeah, and that, I mean, I always look at it like from almost like going into war, right? So for me, I'm coming up with a strategic approach in the beginning, and then I need to make sure that I have tactical responses to any situation that may occur in real time. So then you have to call an audible, just like we do every day as a coach. When a guy comes in and he's beat up, you got to make sure that we're changing some things up. And if you don't have that ability, it's going to be very hard for you to progress and keep things going, or mitigate the risk of overtraining, fatigue, all that other stuff. Yeah. So how when somebody walks in now to the gym, like they walk into Longo's and they're looking to train with you, what's like the beginning structure of how you're going to go about training them?
So that's a good question, and I have always said, so this has kind of been a philosophy of mine. And it's always been that I'll say, you hear me say, all fighters really need the same qualities, but not all fighters possess the same qualities equally. So I think it's very important first, and this is really intertwined quite a bit with what we're talking about in the sports psychology side. I get extensive background. You want to call it motivational interviewing, I'll let them talk half hour, 45 minutes the first time. Because I need to know, where do they come from? What country do they come from? Where do they come from culturally? What is their primary discipline? What did that primary discipline build regarding speed, strength, endurance? What didn't it build, right? So I really like to look at and try to take it. It's not to say that they're not, like what you do is beautiful in the general prep and the corrective. Everybody's going to need some of that, and it has to be done. It has to be done. But the long planning is, I collaborate very often with Ray, and Ray says, well, here's what we'd like to do, here's what we think needs improvement, and then I'll look at those qualities and try to not just focus on them. Like, you'll see me doing things with bands and stuff like that, and a lot of propulsion, and that's not the focus. That is just the little bit of the augmentation where that particular individual might be a little weak. Yeah. So we're just trying to highlight a quality. And if nothing else, make them believe that they're better at that, right? So philosophically, I do a lot of assessment, and like you do, and you take a lot of data and all the data, and I've watched, when you did all that with Dustin, that was wonderful. Looking, right, where is he biomechanically? What do we need to repair immediately? What can we change? So I'll do a lot of corrective work. I'll have somebody collaborate with me, though. I have a physical therapist, so I have less time that I have to dedicate to that, which is nice. And then I'll sit down and we'll do some testing and we'll find out. Are they fast? Are they strong? Can they, throw 400 punches around, but they can't knock over a milk carton? Or can they punch a hole in a dam, but they can't do it more than once? And these are the type of things we have to look at. What are the qualities that they have, and can we, down the road in a 10-week camp, augment some of them and fit it into the plan?
So with that, and I want to go back to that because I know people are going to ask me this, how are you measuring, like, let's say, for instance, that person that can have that one-punch knockout power but does not have the ability to do it for all 5 rounds?
Right. So I think a lot of it, too, is, so I never want to, one thing I'll always do is I really defer to skill coaches because it's really, in the end, they're still the captain. Yeah. So I will ask them. So first, I don't want to make assumptions all on my own, even if we think scientifically, or if we measured VO2, right? And the guy's got a 40 VO2, and in an MMA, it's not, it doesn't carry over as much, but it's not super high. But my point is, I will go, like, I have I'm very blessed that Ray, I say, Ray, what do you think we need? What are we seeing? And then, of course, I watch sparring all the time, and I'll measure that, right? And we'll have heart rate monitors, and we'll watch what discipline gets their heart rate up. I've seen wrestlers, right, be on the ground with 2 guys at a time, and their heart rate's $120. They stand up. They stand up, it goes to 180, and no one's doing anything. So right there, that kind of tells me, all right, well, maybe we can help them in the stand-up, and we can do our strength and conditioning protocols to marry more stand-up. Not just because that's all they need, but also I think what we do, Phil, is part of what we do is, hey, I did A, B, and C to become better at this, and get them to believe that they did A, B, and C too, and that's really important. So if I have a pure stand-up guy he hasn't done as well in the jits and the wrestling, even doing things like horizontal hip thrusts or doing a lot more tactile cueing, getting them more adjusted to touch, to feel. Right? Those are little things that may have an may be helpful. And I just put those into the basic formatting in order to just, like I said, augment a little bit of what they may need.
Yeah. And I see you doing a lot of propulsion and movement and change direction, really.
Yes.
When did you start really implementing that and seeing that as like a prime focus? Not, and again, it's from Instagram, so it could be, you know what I mean? But what do you see, does that translate pretty well to what they're doing inside their sport?
I'm going to say I hope to good God it does, because I've put a lot of time in it and I've looked at it. And so some of the things we're looking at is, what I'm doing there is we don't get the advantage, in particularly stand-up fighting, of that full SSC that somebody might in a grappling position, or they might in American football, right? So generally you have a knee that's in far less degrees of flexion than 90. So what we're trying to do in some of those things is I'm trying to maximize the power and force they can generate in what is technically a compromised position for maximizing force, right, into the ground. So for example, if you and I want to move right, the first thing we're going to do is move with the left hand to get us in that direction. We don't have that luxury. I'm going to drop the hip. I'm going to explode, use the SSC, drive off my right leg, use my whole body to move to the right, bring that right arm that way, tilt that way. My hands are over here. So what we're trying to do with some of those things is just to touch and paint a little bit more and develop the qualities that we love and that we think can help a fighter in the very positions. That's the only amount of specificity. Just adding a couple of sets in the positions of what they'll be doing in the fight sport, right? Not doing anything crazy like, my specificity isn't throwing punches with dumbbells. We're not talking about that. It's just trying to create, how do they get optimal propulsion when they're going to be disadvantaged? Because I have a picture, is a perfect example that I use in presentations, LeBron James going to the basket. Stoic. I mean, like this. Balls over here.
Yeah.
Like they drew his form.
Yeah.
I ask everyone, what would happen to that form if after 2 dribbles, you're allowed to punch him in the face? All of a sudden, your dribble turns to this. Well, that's a little bit what we have to deal with in our movement. We do what you do. You focus on movement quality. Nothing I do is going to work if you don't have the economy of movement, which I love the attention you pay to that. And then if we think we've got that, then we do that propulsion that may be specific to grappling, to wrestling, to going east-west, to going north-south, as long as the mechanics are relatively sound. And I think it's helpful. And you'll see, like, a lot of the plyometric work I'll do after we've done the basics and their landing technique is good, then we don't utilize the hands anymore because they need that propulsion if they're in range without it, So it's small stuff, Phil. It ain't anything crazy.
Yeah, that's awesome because, like, I always would to think, like, there's a lot of change of direction, quote unquote agility or true agility work too as well. That's not really welcomed a lot of the times in combat sports because they just don't know how to do it, right? It's always welcome in football and soccer,
Great
American
point.
football.
We have 20 years of it already, right?
Exactly. And it's very hard, even with the conditioning, right? So, like, with the mixed bioenergetic demands of the sport, it's very hard to kind of solidify what's going to be the main focus sometimes. And a lot of people get it misinterpreted because of, a guy coming from a long distance background or a guy coming from a sprinting background, and you're getting all of this knowledge based upon a particular sport that person has worked on, and he's trying to implement it into a mixed aerobic system sport.
Exactly.
So it's very hard. Like, where do you see is the main, I know this is like a wide question, but where do you see is like the main focus from an energy system training standpoint? What should we be focusing on as a whole? Let's say, for instance, I'm going to give you some more context. Let's say we have a wrestler that's going into MMA that's primarily fast twitch fiber dominant, right? And has the ability to take you down and very explosive, but again, he's in the 155, 145 pound division where he has to make sure that he's able to repeat those bouts.
Absolutely, with that really quick pace and the high volume that those guys would put out. And I think that's a superb question. Now, I think there's a lot of things, first I would say, that we can do to potentially help that, but I first thing is, okay, the training volume, what are they doing for that, right? So, like, for example, Ray does a lot of work with the team as a whole for that type of replicable power and conditioning work. So therefore, you may not see me doing that as much, but I think there's a lot we can do. No doubt about that, because we has to be built into whatever the 21 training sessions a week were already, right? So that's where I think it becomes, really delicate. So you want to take somebody who's super fast twitch, if you could, although the majority would be fast oxidative glycotic, and what you're looking for is replicable power, right? And that's a great question, because I'm not sure we fully know what builds that. Certainly we do know that sparring would, okay? The specificity of sparring, providing it is mimicking what will happen in that given fight. So the replicable power, I don't think you can go wrong first systemically with the, the sprint type work, short duration, super high intensity, a very short rest interval there, but then you also need the localized work too. Particularly if, how many guys have you run into that once they do tie up, and I'm not saying this would be for wrestler, but my point is then they can't throw a punch right afterward. So now we have to take a look at what's going on there. We want to develop the replicable power. What would be great? You have to manage that. I would manage that probably me systemically more than locally, only because of the sheer volume of abuse the joints are taking and the local work they're getting from the punching, the kicking, the jits, right? So I think going systemically first with sprint bouts, whether you want to use assault bike, which I know you use a lot, which is a wonderful tool. It's an absolutely, I believe, wonderful tool for that.
It's just very efficient for us to do and get
It
the
is.
adaptation that we need to without putting them in an added risk of injury.
See, that's something I think that people overlook if they haven't been doing this that often. And that is, well, why aren't you doing A? Why aren't you doing B? Well, I ain't doing A and B because they have a broken cuboid and navicular in their foot. Okay, that's why I'm not doing A and B. But yet they still need to get that cardiorespiratory training. So to your point, that's another factor that we have to look at. So, but I think the assault bike is a good example of that. But then watching and spurring too and seeing what happens. And then consulting with the coach, because you don't want to, you know, if they're doing hill sprints like the Serra-Longo team, they do them as a team and I'll go there, wire everybody up. It's wonderful. There may not be much more I can do beyond that, you know?
They do the same thing with Sanford. They'll go ahead and they'll run the bridge over here on a Saturday. And then, you know, because we're working with my guys now, as opposed to when I was at ATT, I'm working with guys 3, maybe 4 times a week now.
Wonderful, I know.
So I'm able to really hone in.
You can do a lot.
You do a lot right now, and I can. And the great thing about that is that they're giving me autonomy to what I can do with all of them. You know, whereas before I was kind of in a place where I had to go around a lot of situations because of the fact that they were training a lot. And they were doing a lot of skills training, and with ATT, there's a lot of classes.
Got it.
So they're doing a lot of skills training, and honestly, that skills training did help the conditioning of the athlete.
Without
question,
right.
and you have genetic freaks too as well, like Dustin, like Joanna, you know, even like Kobe, that do have a built-in VO2 max, highest as ever.
Are unreal, right?
Yeah, and then from there they're efficient. So now, what do I need to do? Well, one, we're going to look at movement quality, of course, right? So that I can get them more efficient in those specific demands, but also just at least reduce the risk of injury that doesn't need to be there.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so I think from that perspective, it helps with the conditioning, because not only that, we're getting them more efficient. So like, if you take it away from just physiology and you look at biomechanics and you look at the building of it and having them understand like proper proprioception and kinesthetic awareness, and then from there it's like balance, you know, balance, you know, and then posture. I think posture plays a big role too. I
don't think you could be any more correct. And as time has progressed, I've seen the importance of that more and more. And some of it I'll just do in a basic lift where I'll look for the perfection in the goblet squat to make sure we're improving that proprioception and the mechanics and the mobility to achieve those ranges. But I really do agree with you on the importance of that because of the overuse, the back being a good example, right? Not getting enough work in the posterior side, middle trapezius, lower trapezius, a lot of protraction from the sheer volume. So by you looking at those things first, from preventing that repetitive injury, outstanding. Secondarily, improving potential mechanics and the throwing, right? And the generation of power. And to your point too, and I was looking at this a few weeks ago, the movement economy is part of endurance. We know that in running. We know that, right? The marathoners work on their running economy. Now, I don't know anything about running economy. I really don't. Okay, good. You have to. Okay, but why? Because it builds efficiency, and so your point is very well taken, and I think a lot of time needs to be put into it. And you're right. The shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. The body may not. It may use multi-planes that create that straight line. But when things are not working to the extent that you want them to, it's not a straight line. And just one example is I was watching somebody hit the other day, and they have that excessive lateral rotation of the femur. So they're right-handed. This is their right thigh, right? And that toe is always out. How much time are they losing in turnover time to get that toe from here, right? And this is their stance, and it's biomechanic. It's not like, we can see that there's muscles that need to be disinhibited and others that need, right? So this is their toe, and by the time they take that toe on that right leg and bring it all the way around, what's that, a tenth of a second more, 2/10?
That's big.
Less power and more time. So
Timing in general is big. You know,
it is. So I'm just applauding the work that you're doing. There's merit in it.
Oh, I appreciate it.
There's real merit in
Thank
that.
you.
It matters. This is not like a gimmick.
Yeah.
You
Oh,
know.
thank you.
No. Well, there are people that think corrective is or looking at the economy of movement.
There's no, and like Tony, you know me. Like, there's no wasted energy in anything.
Right.
And if there is, then I gotta get it out of there. You
Yes.
know? And then we don't have time to do that. Like, I don't have time to sit here and be like, oh, this is gonna look good for Instagram.
Right.
It's like, my guys got to get ready for a UFC fight. I don't have time for that shit.
And if they don't do well, that doesn't look good.
No,
for Instagram,
100%.
right?
Exactly.
So you better make sure you're doing what matters.
And
right?
we all know the internet will troll.
Oh, yeah, totally get banged up.
So, all right, let's take a step back. I want to talk a little bit about nutrition, because honestly, when it comes down to that, I think that you're the most brightest mind that I've ever been able to talk to about that.
Oh, thank you.
And for that, you know, when it comes down to fight nutrition and getting a person ready, not for the fight, but also for the fight, but also for the scale, because we know we fight that first and foremost.
Exactly.
And so, let's say a basic 8 weeks. We start at 8 weeks. What are you doing in the beginning of those 8 weeks to get them ready and prepared for the scale and then for the fight?
Okay. So first thing I think we need is always a training schedule, because that's their volume. Now, you and I both know that training schedule could be. Sometimes they'll take the pieces and just go, here, a catch, and you'll go like this, and there's just stuff all over the place, right? So, but one thing we would like is, I would like a schedule. Okay, twice a day here, 2 times jits here. So at least I have an idea of total training volume and where we would put the food in. Gotcha. Okay, that's number 1, right? Number 2 is the numbers, the mathematics, right? Body fat. Yeah, right? It's mathematics. How much do they weigh? Here's their body fat. What's their percentage of total body water? If we haven't worked with them before, Phil, then we might have to guess where they were fighting, what percentage of body fat previously. But we want to know, so from 8 to 10 weeks out, then I have the math. Okay, this person's 212. They're 15% body fat. I can fight them at 9. That translates to so much in fat. Probably a lean tissue loss as a percentage of that, if they're eating right, of 20-30%. I calculate that, okay? Then we'll look at the water just a little bit of water is going to go with that fat, right? Yeah. And then we start looking in advance too. I try to start looking during training sessions. What's their turnover? Okay, they pull out 3 or 4 pounds easy every training session. So I have those numbers, and all of a sudden I go from 212 to knowing without a problem with the fat loss, if we do it right, and the lean tissue, and it will be at 196, hypothetically. So without effort, if they listen. Now, then what do? The first thing we do is match the calories to the best of our ability into that training volume. Yeah. I always have to, with protein first when I build a diet. How many grams of protein do they need? And the reason for that is, we don't store protein like we do fat and carbs. We can't afford 3-4 days. If you miss the 3-4 days of carbs, it isn't good, but you still have some glycogen left.
Yeah.
Right? The fat.
Protein and lactate too.
Yeah, yes, right? Exactly. Fat, most of us have more than we'll ever want. Nobody's talking about how much protein they're going to get off their waist by the summer, because everybody's got the fat they need there. So the protein goes first. How many grams of carbs do they need? How many grams of protein to sustain the training volume, to induce recovery, to prevent that proteolysis from so much training? So we get that usually about 1 gram per pound. How many calories does that translate to? Well, I said they needed 3,200. I've got, 800, let's say, in protein. And now I'll start working the carbohydrates and the fat into the 3,200 and what that percentage would be. And that's where we go with the math.
So, there's a lot of, different opinions on protein intake per pound. Like, where do you stand with that?
I'm a proponent of probably getting, when you're training volumes, here's the other thing. People forget about protein. It's not just muscle protein synthesis. It's used in transportation as transporter proteins, peptide hormones.
It's the building blocks of your whole body.
There you go, immunoprotection, T-lymph. So the point to it is it's all over the place. So I like to get, if we can, about 1 gram per pound, at least in lean, right? If the guy has to lose 50 pounds, I don't need to, he's got to go from 250 to 200. I don't need to feed the 50 pounds in protein. But I definitely like a 1 gram per pound max, okay? or that old, 2 grams per kilogram. And I think for the amount of wear and tear that goes on in the fighter, I think it's helpful to do that. For sure, yeah. And it's not that big of a calorie anyway, Phil. It's not like, it's only 4 calories per gram, and you're right. So if I do 200 grams of protein for a 200-pound fighter, or a middleweight, let's say, it's 800 calories. Yeah. It's not like I took up 3,000,
Yeah. And that's where, that's another thing. What's your stand on keto and in fight camp in general?
Keto in fight camp. Well, I've always said this. You can take a Formula One car, right? And the thing about it is, so you make Formula One cars, right? And then the fighter drives it. And you put 10 million into the steering, light fuselage, more fuel efficient. It turns on the dime. It does everything. And you can run a Formula One car on 7-Eleven regular. Mm-hmm. It'll actually go.
Or you can do.
But it ain't gonna win.
You know what I'm going with, right? You know what I'm going with. You know what I'm going with.
I know where you're going with. But my point is, yes. No, don't get me going. But the point to that is, why would you take the $10 million car and run it? Because the fuel mixture in a Formula One is not that different. But obviously, it's not 7-Eleven regular. Yeah. I don't have anything against ketogenic approaches. And if you wanted to do keto, what would be deemed a ketogenic diet, and the tail end of the camp for the cut, okay. But here's my fear with that. If you don't have the glycogen you need, and I ain't even talking about this.
Yeah.
I'm talking about this.
Yeah. That's almost more important.
It's a fuel hub.
For sure.
Right? And you're sitting in there, and you've got a process, and you're sparring, and you're learning
how about interviews? How about that?
That's a great point.
Right,
that's another thing nobody's thinking of. So why am I going to deprive myself of the carbohydrates when it is, I'm not going to say it's the preferred fuel. Preferred depends upon what you're doing. When I'm sleeping, I prefer to burn fat. Yeah. Okay, so it's preferred for that time. Gotcha. Right? So I don't understand, pure keto, if you're talking like 80% fat and 5% carbs, the thing I've always tried to tell athletes, you're not a Navy SEAL or special op. You're going to lose 500 grand if you do this. Your goal is not to tempt physiology in sports and say, I could do this anyway. Your goal is to optimize it. Yeah. I don't care what you can get away with. I don't care if you can get away with 6 hours of sleep. Yeah, getting away with something, is maybe one day loses you the title, and you lost a lot of money from that. And that's your career. So I'm not here to judge a fighter or to tell them what to do. I'm just trying to help them,
Yeah. And that brings me to another thing, because I know that a lot of guys out there will have their fighters fast, in the beginning, maybe one day a week throughout the camp, especially getting closer to the fight. How you feel about just all day fasting, or at least intermittent fasting throughout the camp? Now, obviously, intermittent fasting is a little different.
Right. With a closed window, you restricted eating.
And a lot of times, man, I understand that, because I know a lot of guys don't like to eat with their first training session, especially sparring. When I had King Mo, he didn't like to eat at all.
Yeah.
And then from there he would eat afterwards, and he felt better. He felt like he had more cognition. He felt like he was just better aware. So I don't know, where's your stance on that?
That's a good question. It is totally anecdotal. Guys that are built like King Mo and built, I don't know about you, more like us. Yeah. I think we do a hell of a lot better without eating before training. Yeah. Guys built like Algieri, maybe more like Dustin, a little leaner and that's shredded. I mean, you're lean, but you've got a lot of muscle on your body. I have found the Mezzo does better without, it's anecdotal, I have no research. Yeah. And a guy like, like the lankier, the Cerrone type, and they don't like it at all. But anyway, as far as that, just quickly, I think it's absolutely fine, but you don't want to restrict the window too long, because here's what people forget. Again, you need a lot of nutrients. I mean, you're not just, if you restrict the total eating time, you're restricting this, here's what I try to tell people, and you breathe in oxygen, and you can get vitamin D from the sun. After that, we're done. Yeah. I'm not breathing in potassium, magnesium, calcium, vitamin E, vitamin A, vitamin K, right? And all the other micro minerals or iron. I don't breathe them in. Yeah. There's only one place I get them, and you need them, and that's from your food. True. So you got to keep a lot of nutrient density up, even if you restrict that window. That's where I'm going with it.
Okay, and it's just brought to my attention. I work with Bilal Muhammad, right?
Yes.
Bilal.
Yes.
And so he's got Ramadan.
Exactly. Yes.
So with that, if you had an athlete, and you probably have before.
I have. Yep. Muslim faith. Yep.
Yeah. What's the protocol for that?
Well, that's a really good question. To tell you what I do use, under those circumstances a lot. I supplement a lot, right? Particularly before bed.
Yeah.
You definitely, if they're willing to, and I don't know in the case if he would, and there are certain foods that are restricted as well, right? But let's assume that but like certainly slower kinetic foods, right? So casein before bed, UCAN might be a supplement.
Protein,
Casein protein, yes. Casein protein, why? Yeah, because of the slower kinetics. So what we're at least doing is we're dragging out the time that we have certain things available. So it is really hard for an athlete like that to do that. Now, the one good thing they have going for them is they've had an adaptive response greater than someone else because they've lived that culturally, right? So they'll do that. But what you try to do again after that is get in as much food from the window of sundown to before they go to bed. And I use a lot of supplements only because it's easier to help consume larger volume at that time. Yeah, so they can be really helpful to get, if you only have a 5 or 6 hour protein window, eat a good meal with a lot of nutrient density, then take a protein shake an hour later, then do a slow-acting carbohydrate later so that fuel may be available later.
A little bit of fats in between.
Absolutely, yep.
Yeah, I would say that too because the digestibility of those like a protein shake
exactly
would definitely help.
You're making it easier in that shorter window, and you're making it quicker. So the whey would be wonderful, like soon as they can go whoop and then go eat, and then prior to bed I like things that maybe a UCAN would be good because it's slower acting carbohydrate.
UCAN?
Yeah, UCAN. So the kinetics there are slower. And it was originally made for like a glycogen phosphorylase disease where you can't make glycogen, so liver or muscle. So someone can actually, if they have low blood glucose and you were to burn it out during sleep and you can't produce liver glycogen to go to the brain, it's not a good thing, right? So what they do is they have a slower acting carbohydrate so they can sustain glucose levels for a longer period of time. And that could be something great for...
Yeah, so that would be like almost the opposite of like something like brand cyclic dextrin.
Exactly opposite of like a Vitargo.
Gotcha.
Instead of getting it in there and with it like 10 seconds, now we're going to do it slow.
So then, let's say for instance, after weigh-ins, we would do a Vitargo, obviously, directly after scale. Then after that, through the night maybe, have them wake up and hit
You could.
You can?
You could. I think it can be advantageous. Now, there are people that don't... I know Clint Wattenberg from UFCPI loves it. Yep. Clint's a sharp guy. World-class wrestler. And I like it for the later timing like that. Yes, I obviously want some fast acting with a lot of fluid and electrolytes in the early phases because the most immediately refundable item has to be immediate. The carbohydrate's going to take a while, so you get them in early, fast acting. But then obviously the electrolytes and the fluids and all that come. And then I think that's a wonderful idea to consider having, look, if you put more carbohydrate at night before bed, then the other carbs could be dedicated to it, whether it's going to be liver glycogen, right? And let your body run off the UCAN throughout the night and then send more to muscle glycogen, Now, it doesn't work perfectly like that, but that's a possibility.
No, that's awesome. Yeah, so getting to the weight cut itself, because I know I'm going to get questions on this, and I want to ask you, particularly you're looking at, let's say, a week out. We're 10 days out, okay. Right? We start the weight cut. We start maybe the water load and everything else. What does that week of the fight look like for somebody that you're working with?
Great question. And I think you know the answer. And Dr. Andy Galpin, I love Andy. He'll always say 2 words that are so important. It depends, right? Do we have a train wreck on our hands, or do we have somebody who's done it beautifully? But I would say what we're doing, and I'm a proponent, and I think there's a couple of things. I have my guys drink a lot of water all the time because I get a little nervous sometimes with super saturating, suppressing hormones that would retain water and then just expecting them to come back 5 hours later when you need the actual retention again, right? Like, I'm going to suppress antidiuretic hormone, I'm going to shut it down. And I know the half-life is shorter, so it could come back pretty quick. But my first point is I do a slow, gradual build-up with the water. And one of my primary goals is to study how they sweat. And so you're asking me, how does it look like? I like to build a person that can sweat better. This sounds crazy, but sweat glands are adjustable. They're adaptable, forgive me, I meant to say. And so by having water volume high, by occasionally doing a relaxing sauna here and there, because we have to do that in New York. When the climate's cold, these guys don't leak like they do in Florida. Yeah. We're not getting the rehearsal of somebody who's trained down here in May and June, and your guys can do one workout and drop 6 pounds. My guys are, they're losing 2 pounds because the gym is cold. Right? And so what we have to do is keep the fluid high, and I have to make sure that they've practiced sweating in a relaxing sauna. No plastics. Chill. Keep those glands going effectively. So I really want to be on top of what's their water turnover, and how much fat do we have left? Oh, we can pull another 2 or 3 pounds of fat. This is what the camp is looking like, because it's contingent upon where they are. And where's the diet? Well, the diet would be enough protein, again, to sustain the lean tissue, because during the cut, lean tissue loss is going to be, we got high potential of that. And we don't want that happening, because that's power, speed, and everything you've just worked on. So overall, it's water high, be effective at sweating, how much fat do we have to lose, adjust the calories accordingly. Okay, how much can we still pull in the next 10 days? Because remember, 3 pounds of fat that you didn't need is 3 more pounds of water. So we have to look at where they are, and that's what we're doing. And that 3 pounds of water may be the difference between, okay, this cut was tough or hell. Or hell. So I'm going to get off of them.
Or just not attainable.
Exactly. And we see that a lot, So just that's how I have to view it. I wish I could be very specific, but it's when it goes well.
You need more.
Yeah. When it goes well, it's just, here's your calories. Sure. Let's keep the intensity low. Do your skill training. A lot of times I want to do a low intensity cardio to burn a little bit of the extra fat. Yeah. Don't tax the nervous system. Nothing even weight bearing at that point. Let's get off all the fat we can if they still have some left. Yeah. That's my key. If you can fight at 9%, fight at 9%. Because if you fight at 11, it does nothing to augment performance, and all it's doing is making more water we got to pull out.
Okay, so now they stepped off the scale, right? What are the main things we're putting in directly off the scale?
And a lot of people disagree, and they'll argue about this. And now I think it's also contingent upon how bad was the water cut. Yeah. If they just lost 78 pounds of water, But generally speaking, the first hour is, and a lot of times it's their preference. Yeah. If a guy likes Pedialyte, I'm not going to take it away, okay? Because it's good for their head, right? They like it. I'll mix that with a little water, a little coconut water. I'll put Vitargo in the drink. Yeah. One of the things I love to do is I make the drinks the night before and leave fruit in it. Okay. So I'll put berries in there and strawberries, and they get all soft. Right, they get flavor, and then what they can do is the fruit's soft, and they eat it right out afterward. Super digestible. Right after having their drink, right? So that drink is loaded, maybe some Noon. It's electrolyte based, general sodium potassium ratio, because they lose. People like to cut sodium and worry about it, but these kids, sodium comes out of them in droves. I'm not saying you load it the week before, but I'll sprinkle a little in. We'll get a little extra sodium loading in there. So that drink might have a little coconut water, a little Vitargo is a carbohydrate powder, a little bit of Pedialyte if they like that. I'll leave my fruit in there. It'll be overnight. They'll sit in there, sprinkle a little salt, and then everything is, from there, steady fluids, steady electrolytes first hour, maybe even hour and a half, soft foods, baby food, a little bit of strawberry preserves, melon, pick at the soft stuff, fluids, electrolytes, an hour and a half, 2 hours. And again, it depends on the cut, because if they haven't been eating, it's going to take them 2 hours. Then we'll go to a soft meal, maybe some rice cakes with some preserves. We start that, and then 2 hours out, we'll start maybe the harder foods. 2.5 hours out if they're ready, sweet potatoes, some brown rice, smaller amounts of protein, stuff like that.
I used to do, when I was fighting, I used to do sweet potato like about 2 hours after.
Yeah.
And I would do the drink, obviously. I would wait till I was fully hydrated, almost so I was peeing slightly clear.
That's another great point. Did you have urination yet, right?
Yeah.
So, and you will if you're doing that nice fluid and fruit and all those things we just mentioned.
You always have, not to get too graphic, but you always have the first pee is always going to be brown, almost
it'll look like what for those of you who haven't been there, but trust me, the Hudson River in New York.
Yeah. Exactly. You're like,
That's what it looks
am I dead?
Right.
Like, is this happening?
It's not.
Yeah.
It's alarming.
Yeah, the next one looking a little bit like, hopefully it looks like a little bit of green Gatorade,
Exactly.
right? And then you're.
I'm just looking for one. Was it a tint or one new lighter?
I need something.
Yeah.
So then once I see that, then again the seal has been broken.
That's exactly right.
So then it's food and making sure. Like I love the sweet potato, and I would do. And like I wouldn't do this now, but tilapia was just easiest.
Yeah, it's practical.
Yeah, it was super
it's
easy.
practical.
And like I didn't have any money then either, so that was cheapest too as well.
It's the kind of the pigeon or fish, right?
Yeah,
but
yeah, 100%.
but it works. But I think the sweet potato, to your point, particularly, and what I like to do is I make a bunch of them, and you leave them in the refrigerator and they get soft, and that's the way I want them for the athlete, right? Because I make it easy, soft food. The softer the better till that 2.5, 3 hour window comes. And if they've really had a hard cut, they're probably going to have even a harder time eating at 2.5. So we stick with the preserves, the melons, the berries, the fruits. I love baby food. It goes down. It's practical with the water. Throw another noon in, electrolytes. Take weight. How's the weight coming? Look at the urination, and then it's then you can start to allow them to have the carbs of their preference. But I just wish, I don't mind a little piece of chocolate, but some of these guys even still are going crazy, with pizza. And
Oh man, yeah, I know it's bad.
there's nothing worse.
It's bad, I know.
One slice, okay.
Yeah, they're like, and you gotta. It's almost like they're children. Like
People
they're
don't
like kids.
People don't get it.
Yeah.
They really don't. And again, it's not for me to change them, but
You look at it like it gets rough about if you're really cutting weight. It's about 6 weeks to 4 weeks, and that's where it really gets tough because the diet starts to really taper down, and then like they're always watching the Food Network channels, and like it's always the worst things, and it's always something that they really wouldn't eat.
totally.
Right?
That they're now craving, yes.
I would do that, and I'd be like, I wouldn't even eat this. I look back at it, and then after I'm done, I don't even want it no more. It's crazy.
It is, and that's okay because the brain does that. It's not even their fault. Like you're in a mode where you have hyperactivity and caloric restriction. Everything starts to look good. You're designed that way, and we only have so much. Like I don't have the bandwidth to be disciplined in 9 things. So you're training hard. You're trying to sleep. You're focusing. You need a little something, and I'm for that. If everything else is going good, I mean, if you eat 28 meals a week, 7 times 4 with snacks, whatever, and 2 a bed, nothing's gonna happen. But you can't go off the deep end.
Man, have you ever been like hungry going to the supermarket?
Yes, which they always say, right? In social psychology and neuroscience, never shop hungry.
Yeah, I didn't even need a class in that. I knew that was bad. I knew that. I was getting shit that I didn't even want when I got home. I finished eating some of the stuff before I got to the house.
Exactly.
I'm like, all right, this is not good, man.
Hey, you're absolutely right, and they primed you for that. Don't think that, by accident, McDonald's, which I like, okay, I'm not putting you down, used red and yellow by accident 50 years ago.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Okay?
This is interesting.
We stop at red lights.
Yeah.
Fire engines used to be red, right? Stop signs are red. Why? Get your attention, okay? There's color psychology matters. And you walk down the market and you're starving and you see these bright boxes and they get your attention. And that's another thing that pulls you in there. Over and over again, the research shows, Phil, if you leave a bowl of jelly beans here with 3 colors and you and I are picking at them and there's another bowl with 8 or 9, we're going to eat way more with the 8 or 9 colors. Yeah. So my point...
But it's another thing, like just in colors in general, like nobody fucking likes the green jelly bean. You eat a green jelly bean? You're weird. Right?
You don't like
green.
green.
Eat green jelly beans too. He's probably like, damn, I'm the only one.
But what happens with more colors? You're like, ooh, green, I'll mix it with orange. Hey, I got almost a red one. So
there it is.
This is why the colors, but
I'm trying to think like if we had any fast food restaurants that's green.
No, you may see a hint of it, but look at all of them. You'll see the colors almost persistently red and yellow, or like a bright purple.
McDonald's, Burger King, Chick-fil-A.
Red, there you go. It's the same thing over and over. And that is, right, you stop at a red light, right? You get, it's attention getting. And if you go to the supermarket, I mean, a red pepper is red, but it doesn't look as good as red box of Pop-Tarts, really. So you got You can't go to the market too hungry because they'll get you on
No,
that.
you gotta ride the outline.
That's what they say, right?
can't
Because
do
that's
that.
where the disposable foods are.
Yeah, you can't do that. I do though.
You what's that? Go in the outline? Or
Yeah, it's for
middle?
my kids though.
Oh
But
yeah, well, that's hard.
I got an excuse.
You put me in front of a box of Cocoa Puffs, I'm knocking the whole thing down. I don't want to.
Man, no wonder I can't get as lean as I'm supposed to get lean.
You know what you do? Maybe wear some glasses where you don't see any bright colors, you know? It'll shut it down a little bit.
Oh man, all right, it's been a great talk.
No, I enjoyed it,
Yeah, it's
man.
awesome to have you here, honestly.
It's good. I'm excited. I'm here in Daru Strong's facility, and I've been watching on Instagram for some months now, and Phil's a good friend, and I'm just like real happy to be here. So thanks for having me, man.
Appreciate it, brother. All right, and also make sure you guys check his Instagram out, Fight Shape.
Yeah, Fight Shape, and it's just a little underslash, and my last name's Ricci, Ricci, so easy to find me.
Cool. All right, thanks.
Thanks, brother.
All right, next time.